OnePlus' latest entry-level model for Asian and European markets is the Nord CE 3 Lite. The third-generation model is a minor improvement over its predecessor, with the most notable differences on paper being the switch to a new 108-megapixel main camera and faster 67-watt SUPERVOOC charging. The Nord CE 3 Lite is also nearly identical to the Realme 10 Pro, which we previously reviewed. This means it has the same 6.72-inch 120Hz 1080p display, 5000 mAh battery, headphone jack, and 108MP main camera as the iPhone. Furthermore, because this is a rebranded Realme phone, it lacks distinctive OnePlus features such as the alert slider. The OnePlus Nord CE 3 Lite's design is very similar to that of the Realme 10 Pro, with a few minor differences. The front has a flat glass display with the same large cutout in the center for the front camera as the back. The bezels are thicker at the bottom of the display, but the Nord CE 3 Lite also seemingly has thicker bezels at the top than the Realme 10 Pro. This could be because the display is slightly larger despite having the same dimensions. The Nord CE 3 Lite has a power button on the right side that also serves as a fingerprint sensor. Because it's only on one side, it's difficult to use with the left hand or when the phone is lying on its back. It also gets triggered while just holding the phone in your hand, and when you actively try to press it, it's difficult to find because it's flush with the frame. The usual OnePlus alert slider is missing from the phone's right side. We've seen this in the past when Oppo's other products' rebranding efforts were lazier than usual, and the fact that this is a low-cost model probably doesn't help. Whatever the reason, one of the most recognizable OnePlus features is missing from this OnePlus phone. The dual SIM tray is located on the phone's left side. The volume controls have been shifted to the left, as opposed to the right on the Realme 10 Pro. Those who have used other OnePlus phones will recognize the new layout. A microphone is located on the phone's top. A thin grill can be seen between the display and the top of the frame for the earpiece. One of the loudspeakers is also housed in the earpiece. A second microphone, the other loudspeaker in the stereo pair, and a 3.5mm headphone jack are located on the phone's bottom. A USB-C connector is also included, which supports USB 2.0 speeds. The back of the phone resembles that of the Realme 10 Pro. It has the same large dual circular elements for the cameras as before, but this time there are 3 instead of 2. The flash has also been relocated to a more central position with a larger aperture. The CE 3 Lite is unapologetically plastic as an entry-level model in the Nord series. Everything is made of plastic, from the frame to the back cover. Instead of the Corning model found on more expensive devices, the front is made of Asahi Dragon Trail Star glass. This time around, the front glass appears to have a better oleophobic coating, whereas the Nord CE 2 Lite either had a much worse version or no coating at all. The plastic back, on the other hand, quickly accumulates smudges and is more scratch-prone than glass. The build quality is adequate for a phone made primarily of plastic. The casing has no flex or creak, and the phone feels solid in the hand. The phone has no ingress protection or coating claimed. The Nord CE 3 Lite is available in 2 colors, chromatic gray and the vibrant pastel lime shown here. The lime variant is depicted in all marketing materials as a flat green color, but it appears significantly different in real life due to the iridescent finish, which shifts the green hue around in different lighting. The Nord CE 3 Lite features a 6.72-inch 2400 by 1800 IPS LCD display. The display has a refresh rate of up to 120 Hz. The up to part is important because most apps on the phone do not work at 120 Hz, but more on that later. The company claims a typical brightness of 550 nits and a peak brightness of 680 nits. When we tested it on the Realme 10 Pro, this display didn't quite reach the 680 nits mark, but it came close at 619 nits. Regardless of the numbers, the display is bright enough to be seen outside in direct sunlight. OnePlus claims display P3 support, but we don't know how much color space it covers. In any case, it does fully support sRGB. Color accuracy is subpar out of the box, which we've come to expect from Nord phones because the company rarely bothers to calibrate them. The main culprit is the color temperature, which is clearly too cool out of the box and isn't warm enough for standard sRGB values even when set to the warmest manual level. Contrast and black levels are lower than on a typical OLED panel, but not to the point where they are distracting or even noticeable if you don't know what you're looking for. Viewing angles are actually better than they are with budget OLED panels, with no strange color casts when viewed from an angle. The device does not support HDR, which is fortunate because HDR performance on LCD displays is mediocre at best. In terms of refresh rate, the display can refresh at 120 Hz on the home screen and in some of the default apps. The display can also switch between 30, 48, 50, 60, 90, and 120 Hz depending on the content, which is convenient because it covers all of the popular frame rate combinations. Unfortunately, the good news does not stop there. The Nord CE 3 Lite has one of the most aggressive and draconian dynamic refresh rate implementations we've seen. Most of the time, the phone is set to either 60 Hz or 90 Hz, regardless of what they did. The majority of the apps we tested on the phone refreshed at 60 Hz or 90 Hz. Only a few apps refreshed at the full 120 Hz, and even when they did, it felt more like an accident than a deliberate choice. The Nord CE 3 Lite is powered by the same 5000 mAh battery as the Realme 10 Pro. To get the full scoop on the battery life figures, read our full review of that phone. We were more interested in testing the charging speeds because that was the only advertised change with the Nord CE 3 Lite. The phone comes with an 80-watt charger but supports up to 67-watt, which is still a significant improvement over the 33-watt provided by the Realme 10 Pro. The Nord CE 3 Lite is powered by Oxygen OS 13.1 on top of Android 13. At this point, there is no discernible difference between Oxygen OS 13.1 and Realme UI 4.0, which is identical to ColorOS 13. You've seen one if you haven't seen them all. As such, the Nord CE 3 Lite basically feels like the Realme 10 Pro in use. Multitasking has also been improved over stock Android. In addition to the standard split-screen mode, you can open some apps in their own floating windows that can be pinned to the top or sides of the display. Smart Sidebar allows you to keep frequently used apps in a special drawer attached to the screen side that can be accessed from anywhere. You can also swipe and hold from the edge to return to the previous app if you're using navigation gestures. An always-on mode is one feature that the LCD display lacks. This means that when powered down, the display turns off instantly and cannot be left on to display time and other information. Other features include a dark mode, adaptive sleep that only turns off the display when you aren't looking, app cloner to create two instances of apps that don't allow you to use two accounts at the same time, and an optional battery health feature that waits to charge past 80% until just before you start using your device. There is also air gesture support, which allows you to answer or mute calls by waving your hand in front of the phone. The Nord CE 3 Lite is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695, which is also found in the Realme 10 Pro and the previous generation Nord CE 2 Lite. There's also 8GB of LPDDR4X memory and the option of 128GB or 256GB UFS 2.2 storage with microSD expansion. When the device's system memory runs out, a virtual memory expansion feature allows you to create a 4, 6, or 8GB page file on the storage to swap from. This chipset's performance is adequate at best. It does perform slightly better than the Nord CE 2 Lite, which felt quite sluggish at times, and this may be due to the newer software on the CE 3 Lite. Even so, you may experience some slowdowns and hitches while scrolling or multitasking. One particular annoyance is the occasionally slow touchscreen response, which will simply not register your inputs. The refresh rate is frequently lower than 120 Hz, which makes the performance appear worse than it is. The phone feels fine to use at 120 Hz. Most of the time, it's fine at 90 Hz. However, the Nord CE 3 Lite will frequently simply drop to 60 Hz, and you will be transported back to 2018. Gaming performance is also subpar, unless you prefer simple arcade games. It doesn't help that the display is still limited to 60 Hz in the majority of them. The Nord CE 3 Lite has a triple camera system on the back, but as you can see, only one of them is usable. The main 108-megapixel f1.75 camera, as well as the 2-megapixel depth sensor, are carried over from the Realme 10 Pro. The 2-megapixel macro mode is new, but you can probably tell this isn't going to be a useful addition. A 16-megapixel camera is located on the front. There is no ultra-wide on the back, which should disappoint many people. Most people would prefer a single usable ultra-wide camera over two placebo cameras, but bean counters don't think like you or me, so two placebo cameras it is. In daylight, the main camera produces acceptable results. The level of detail is good, but it is ultimately limited by the image's 12-megapixel output resolution, so it doesn't really matter if the images were created with 108-megapixel pixels, especially since these aren't standard RGB pixels. In addition, the images are slightly over-sharpened, as if to sell you on the 108-megapixel hype. Color reproduction is excellent, as it has been on OnePlus phones for several years. The dynamic range is also adequate with HDR enabled, but the images appear more natural when HDR is disabled, so that may be worth experimenting with. However, the sensor does not perform well in low light, and shadow regions in well-lit images frequently have noise and noise reduction artifacts. The 108-megapixel mode isn't very useful. You get a 108-megapixel image, but it's actually a 12-megapixel image that has been upscaled to 108 megapixel because the sensor can't produce 108 megapixel images. The 3x lossless zoom function is intriguing. It, too, produces 12 megapixel images by cropping from the center of the sensor. It looks pretty good in terms of detail reproduction when it works. Unfortunately, colors suffer as they are frequently undersaturated with a cooler white balance. When the sensor is set to 1:1 pixel mode rather than 9:1 pixel mode, there aren't enough pixels to estimate the color value for each of them, causing the images to lose color definition. As expected, the macro camera performs poorly. The images are dark and lack detail and color. The fixed focus is difficult to work around, and the lens's wide aperture forces you to manually approach the subject, often obscuring it with your own shade or reflection. Video performance is also easily forgotten. You are limited to a maximum resolution of 1080p at 30 frames per second. There is no OIS, and the digital stabilization looks bad while adding artifacts. The level of detail is average, and the dynamic range is poor. The colors appear to be the only positive aspect of the image quality, but they, too, falter when the light levels fall. The OnePlus Nord CE 3 Lite is essentially a rebranded Realme 10 Pro. The only noticeable difference is the faster 67-watt charging, which, ironically, did not work during our testing. The only other distinction is the color options for both phones, with the Nord CE 3 Lite featuring the appealing pastel lime and the Realme 10 Pro featuring the distinctive hyperspace gold. As a result, you could really go with either phone because they are otherwise as similar as two phones can get. We're not sure why Oppo is launching them in the same market at all. It's not like the old OnePlus values matter anymore, and any fans of the brand could just as easily buy a Realme phone for all the difference it makes. The Nord CE 3 Lite lacks even the alert slider, one of the last remaining distinguishing OnePlus features. Aside from that, the Nord CE 3 Lite is a fairly standard budget phone with all of the essentials. The phone's biggest flaw is its bogus advertised 120 Hz refresh rate, which could just as easily be marketed as 90 Hz. At this price point, it's difficult to be too critical. However, the Redmi Note 12 5G costs roughly the same but includes an AMOLED display, an IR blaster, and an IP53 rating. If it's available in your region, it's our first choice, but the Nord CE 3 Lite is also a good budget option.